The world is your mirror. Have you ever heard this experience? This notion of seeing reality and our life experience as a mirror for the inner world. There are some really useful things about this paradigm, and there are some limitations and ways it can be misconstrued and lacking dimensionality that is useful for interacting with our outer experiences. So, seeing the world as a mirror and our relationships and other people and different phenomena in the outer landscape as a mirror for the inner landscape can really support us in moving out of a victim consciousness and experiencing more empowerment and willingness to really take account for what we are operating from. Maybe you call it a frequency, a belief system, a frame of reference, a filter. There are all these very valuable things we start to come into contact with when we see the world as a mirror. However, sometimes when we are interacting with life and with other people with this paradigm, we inadvertently make things too much about ourselves without actually honoring that there are things in the outer experience that don't always show us a perfect mirror image to our inner world, but rather illuminate a correlate within us or a interlocking dynamic. So, for example, one of the key experiences I've had with this is seeing how being my empathetic nature has turned into codependency at times, where I've been very subservient to other people, very interested in other people's needs, wants, preferences, at the expense of my own, a sense of loss of self. And that kind of energy that I was operating from seemed to attract more and more people who had tendency towards narcissistic expression. Not to say they're all narcissists, however, they had more of a narcissistic bent than to their expression, because that was my expression and that was a perfectly interlocking match to that energy balance. So it wasn't just a perfect mirror. However, in relationship with folks who had those narcissistic traits, I did look in the mirror and see that I am the sick boy, as chain smokers would put it. I would look in and see my own narcissistic components and work with those. However, it wasn't just a mirror for that, though. It was this recognition of a reflection on my inner landscape, but it wasn't a mirror image. It was an interlocking component often. And this is where looking at life as a window, rather, that has a reflection. We can see ourselves when the light hits the window. We see our reflection in that window, but it also shows us a view into another reality, another experience. So that is something that can be really helpful when we are exploring mirror work, and that can be literally looking in mirrors and looking at ourselves and communing with our own sense of self and our self-image, but also to see the world and relationships outside of us as mirrors to our inner landscape. And then what happens when we allow it to be a window with a reflection that shows us something inside of ourselves, but also allows us to see into other dimensions of experience, of expression. Ultimately, I think in either of these paradigms, whether we're thinking about it as a mirror or a window with a reflection and a view into another world, we are experiencing connection. We are experiencing the interconnectedness of life and ultimately oneness. If you will, it can open up this notion of being part of the various expressions of God, and none of us being God in and of ourselves, but being a facet, a cell in the earth body, so to speak. Food for thought. Consider it if you will.